Welcome to episode 11 of the Wood Whisperer video podcast. I'm your host, Marc Spagnuolo, and today we're going to do something just a little bit different. We're going to actually start in the office. I've got a new project coming along that's a table/desk for a customer. It's relatively simple in design, sort of reminiscent of the arts and crafts mission style period, but I figured it would be a great project for you guys to take a look at. Now, I'm really under a time crunch here, so part of this video may not be as good as it normally would be, but I thought it was more important for you guys to get an opportunity to get the cut list, see how some of these things are done, because at this point there's no reason why, if you followed through the previous videos, why you can't do a project like this. We did milling in one of the earlier episodes. We showed in the cutting board episode how to do some basic laminations and glue-ups, and we also even covered mortise and tenon, which is the primary joint of this entire project. So sit back and relax, and we'll take a look at the process on how I get started from the minute I get the request from the customer. Now, the customer's already sent us a JPEG image of a table that looks very similar to the one that they want, so we're actually going to use that as our model. Now, we don't know what the dimensions are of this particular desk, but what we do know is that the customer wants theirs to be about 36 inches deep and 72 inches long. So we essentially have to reverse engineer this project. I need to look at the dimensions, the proportions, and the average size of things in this picture, and then bring those into what we're actually doing. And I think ours is going to be a little wider and a little longer than this particular unit here, so we'll adjust those numbers as we go, but let's get started and see how this works out. So the first order of business is to make a list of the dimensions that we're absolutely sure of. Now, we know we want the table to be 36 inches deep and 72 inches long. We also know that we want it to be about 30 inches in height, and that's an average desk height, meaning with a 3/4 inch top, our legs should be about 29 1/4 inches long. The legs themselves, I'm going to go with a 3 inch by 3 inch square leg. That'll be nice and sturdy for a 6-foot long table. And the next thing for us to look at are the aprons. We've got a nice long apron in the front and back, and then shorter aprons on the sides, and we need to determine what the optimal length would be for those. The easiest way that I know to do this is to draw it out. I like to envision flipping the table upside down and looking at an overhead view where you could see the leg, the apron, the table's dimensions. You could lay everything out that way, and it becomes very clear once you do. So either get a ruler and a piece of paper and start drawing it out, or you can use a program like I use called SketchUp. It's a free program that's available from Google. You can get it for a PC or a Mac, and if you have a computer with an internet connection, you should be able to run this program with no problem. Now, it is a very, very deep program. You could really get into some really cool stuff with it. For me personally, I use it as a tool to quickly organize, get my dimensions all straightened out, and make sure my proportions look good. I also use it as a sales tool sometimes to give that to my customers when they want to see a 3D rendering of what their project will look like. In this case, we're not going to get into any of that. We're going to keep it very simple. We're just going to draw out the basics so we can determine what our final numbers are. So let's go ahead and take a look at that.
Let's start by drawing the tabletop. I use the rectangle tool to do this. Just click to a point where you want the rectangle to start, type in the length and width separated by a comma, and hit enter. The rectangle should be exactly 36 inches by 72 inches. Next, I select the push-pull tool, select my rectangle, start pulling it in a direction I want it to go, and then type in 3/4 of an inch. The next thing I'd like to do is add a leg. In order to do that, I want to make sure that the table overhangs the legs by 1 inch on each side. So I need to draw that square in 1 inch from one side and 1 inch from the other side. So I use the measuring tool to just put layout marks on a tabletop. 1 inch in each direction, and then I use the rectangle tool the same way we did with the tabletop, and just type in 3 inches, 3 inches, enter, and it should give me a nice 3x3 square. Next, I use the push-pull tool to extend the leg up to 29 1/4 inches. Now, I know there's a smarter way to do this in SketchUp. You can create models and objects that could be reproduced and just copy and paste it in the drawing, but I'm not too familiar with it, so I'm just going to quickly redraw another 3x3 square and use the push-pull to bring it up to 29 1/4 inches. Finally, I add a third leg, just like the other two. We only need 3 legs to get the answers to our questions here, so I'm not going to bother with the fourth.
So at this point, it's relatively easy to determine what the length of our aprons is going to be. We've got a side apron here, our long apron for the front and back is over here, and we could simply just strike a line and measure it. But right now we want to take it one step further, and I'd actually like to draw the entire thing in there. So what we need to do is look at our picture again, the original JPEG image. To me, from what I see here, it looks like our aprons are probably a little bit wider than the width of the legs. So if the legs are 3, I'm thinking it's pretty fair to call those aprons 3.5 inches. So let's go ahead and draw those in and see where it takes us.
I want the aprons to be about a 1/2 inch in from the outside edge of the leg. So I use the marking tool to place a reference mark on the leg itself. Using the rectangle tool, I draw a 3.5 inch by 3/4 inch rectangle on the inside face of the leg. And using the push-pull tool, I pull the rectangle to the inside face of the other leg. I then repeat the process for the front apron.
Now the next thing we have to do is determine the location of these bottom curved rails. Again, using the picture and elements in the picture, you could determine where the location of that piece will be. For me, I'm looking at this distance. How far is it from the bottom of the leg? And in relative terms, looking at other things in the picture, looks to me like it's about twice the thickness of one of these legs. So if the legs are 3, I would say this is about 6 inches from the bottom of the leg, and that's where we're going to start drawing it into SketchUp.
Using all the same methods as before, I add the bottom rail 6 inches up from the bottom of the leg.
Now let's take a look at the vertical slat pieces here on the side. This particular picture shows 3, and to me they look like they should be about 3 inches wide. And given the numbers that we have, when I place 3-inch wide slats in there, it just doesn't seem to look right. There's too much space on either side. So I'm actually going to add a 4th in there. So there will be 4 3-inch slats across this distance, and we have to figure out how we want those spaced. That was just trial and error. I know I want a larger space in the front and the back, and a smaller space in between. And what works out really well for me is 5 inches till the first slat, then a 3-inch slat itself, and then 2 inches in between each, and that gives us the exact distance across here. I did draw that to confirm it in my picture, so let's take a look and see how that turns out.
Using the marking tool, I place reference marks from left to right at 5 inches, then 3 inches for the slat, then a 2-inch space, then 3 inches for another slat, and so on. Next, I use the rectangle tool to draw each of the slats. Then using the push-pull tool, I extend each slat to the bottom rail.
Now the one last detail, which I'm not going to bother putting into the SketchUp drawing, it's just too much work, is the fact that these slats will actually give a bit of a reveal where they meet the cross rails and the top side apron. So these are going to be about a 1/2 inch thick, and then the aprons themselves are going to be 3/4 of an inch thick, and that'll give a little 1/8 inch reveal on either side of these slats and just give it a little bit more visual interest and appeal. So you can clearly see that I'm not a professional SketchUp user. I'm certainly not an advanced user by any means. I do what I need to do to get the job done, and I know there are much better ways to do some of these things, and I'm trying to learn those, and as soon as I learn them, I'll definitely show you guys. But I don't really need to know that much to get this far, and it didn't take very long for me to do this. Basically what we have here tells us that our proportions are right, tells us we're getting exactly what we want, lets us know whether those 4 slats look right, and to me they do, so I don't see any reason why we can't, at this point, on paper, write down our cut list and head out to the shop and start cutting some wood.
And here's the final cut list. Keep in mind that these final dimensions do not include the extra length required for tenons. I plan on using a loose tenon construction method for all of my joinery. Now if you decide to use traditional integral tenons, add 3 inches to the length of all of your apron pieces and 2 inches to the side slats. This allows you to make a 1.5 inch tenon on the aprons and 1 inch tenons on the side slats.